The Sound of Music wasn't just another musical. It was a gamble in the Austrian mountains. But behind the songs and the smiles, it was survival on every note. A leading man who despised the part, a role Julie Andrews nearly lost before it began, and a studio on the brink, saved by one film. These are 20 weird facts about The Sound of Music, and hidden inside the hills and the history, nature tried to crush it. Number 1. That opening shot of Maria twirling on the mountaintop looks like freedom itself, but for Julie Andrews, it was misery. The meadow was cold and slick from rain, and circling above was a helicopter carrying the camera. Every time it swooped low, the rotor wash blasted her with such force that she was knocked flat into the grass. Take after take, she braced herself, determined to stay upright, only to be slammed down again. Andrews later joked she ate grass more than she danced it. What became one of the most iconic, joyful images in film history was, behind the scenes, a battle between a determined actress and a merciless machine. And the mountain never gave her a break. Number 2. On screen, the children's tumble into the lake looks playful, a burst of spontaneous fun, but behind the camera, it turned dangerous. Kim Karath, the youngest playing little Gretel, couldn't swim. Julie Andrews was meant to fall backward, close enough to catch her. Instead, she toppled the wrong way, plunging too far to reach the child. Panic rippled across the set as the 5-year-old began to sink, her heavy costume pulling her under. Crew members dove in instantly, hauling her to safety while Andrews scrambled in shock. The shot stayed in the film, cut to look innocent, but for those who were there, it was unforgettable. A reminder that even in a story about joy and music, the water carried real danger. Number 3. 16 going on 17 plays like a dream. Liesl twirling through the gazebo, swept up in first love. But the magic shattered on the very first take. Actress Charmian Carr leapt onto a bench, slipped on the wet surface, and crashed straight through a pane of glass. The impact left her ankle badly sprained, swollen, and painful. Production couldn't stop, so Carr soldiered on with her leg wrapped tight, bandages hidden beneath her gown. Every graceful step you see on screen was laced with grit and pain, her smile masking the injury. The number that captured innocence and romance for audiences worldwide was, behind the scenes, a triumph of sheer endurance, a fairy tale dance born out of real agony. Number 4. The Gazebo Confession was meant to be pure romance. Maria and Captain Von Trapp finally admitting their love. The music swelled, the camera rolled, and then the lights betrayed them. The heavy lamps above the set let out rude, sputtering raspberry noises every time they powered on. Julie Andrews collapsed into giggles, unable to keep a straight face, while Christopher Plummer tried and failed to hold character as the gallant captain. Take after take fell apart in laughter until director Robert Wise made a desperate choice: kill the lights and film the scene in silhouette. The result was soft, tender, and unforgettable. One of the most iconic love scenes in cinema, but its magic was born not from planning, but from laughter echoing through the night. Number 5. Christopher Plummer may have played Captain Von Trapp with quiet dignity, but behind the camera he loathed the sound of music. He sneered at it as the sound of mucus and complained that the sugary tone was suffocating. Filming in Salzburg only deepened his misery. Isolated from friends, drowning in endless retakes, he numbed himself at night in the beer halls, trying to forget the role that felt more burden than triumph. Yet the contradictions made his performance stronger. In public, he mocked the film. In private, he admitted that Captain Von Trapp's grief, a widower clinging to discipline, trying to raise his children against a tide of loss and war, touched something in him. When the time came to sing Edelweiss, Plummer poured out all the melancholy he carried. On set, the crew watched him choke up during takes, his bitterness giving way to something fragile and true. Audiences never saw the man who hated the movie. They saw a father breaking as he sang to his homeland, his voice trembling like Austria itself. Ironically, the very role Plummer despised became one of the most enduring of his career. On screen, he looked solemn, but off screen, he was waltzing through bitterness, unaware he was creating a moment cinema would never forget. Number 6. Captain Von Trapp's Edelweiss feels heartfelt, a quiet anthem that seems to pour straight from Christopher Plummer's soul, but the voice audiences heard wasn't his. Plummer recorded the songs himself, only for producers to decide his baritone wasn't strong enough. They replaced it with Bill Lee, a professional singer who specialized in dubbing Hollywood stars. For Plummer, it was humiliating. He admitted Lee sang better, but resented losing that part of his performance. Still, the illusion worked. On screen, the captain's trembling voice carried the weight of a man saying goodbye to his country. For millions of viewers, it was Plummer's moment, even if the sound came from someone else's throat. Number 7. Maria Von Trapp wasn't always destined to be Julie Andrews. In the early casting talks, Hollywood aimed higher up the glamour ladder. Doris Day was approached first, but she laughed off the idea. "I'm not a nun," she quipped, refusing to trade her sultry image for a habit. Audrey Hepburn declined too, claiming she was too old. Grace Kelly, now Princess of Monaco, was courted as well, but her royal duties barred her from returning to the screen. Through it all, composer Richard Rodgers Rogers insisted that Julie Andrews was the one. Fresh off Broadway, her voice had a clarity that felt born for Maria, but executives weren't convinced. They doubted her screen presence, worried she was too prim, too tied to Mary Poppins. Then fate intervened. Walt Disney, proud of Andrews' work in Poppins, privately screened footage for Fox executives. In minutes, the doubts crumbled. They saw magic. A nanny who could command a screen as easily as a stage. Even then, Andrews nearly slipped away in a bitter contract dispute. Only compromise kept her attached. She later admitted she feared typecasting as a singing governess, but destiny had already chosen. From the stars who said no to the studio that almost let her go, the role landed exactly where it belonged. Julie Andrews didn't just play Maria, she became the heartbeat of the hills. Number 8. The Do-Re-Mi montage looks like sunshine and freedom, but filming it in Salzburg was chaos. Sudden thunderstorms rolled across the mountains, forcing the crew to stop mid-song. Whole days were lost to downpours, costumes soaked, and instruments warped by rain. To finish the sequence, editors stitched together footage shot weeks apart. In one cut, the sky beams blue. In the next, storm clouds linger. On screen, it plays like a seamless romp through the hills. But behind the curtain, the cheerful medley was a logistical nightmare. Every burst of joy came with a shadow just out of frame. The Austrian weather, unpredictable and unrelenting. Number 9. Filming the Anschluss parade created real controversy. Production hung massive swastika banners across Salzburg's historic district, and the effect was chillingly real. Locals were horrified, and some even reported the crew to authorities. To Austrians, the wounds of Nazi rule were still raw, and seeing those flags waving again, even for a movie, was unbearable. City officials demanded permits and stricter oversight before filming could continue. What was meant as set dressing had reopened scars that hadn't healed. On screen, the banners mark the Von Trapp's darkest hour. Off screen, they reminded Salzburg that history was not so easily dressed up and forgotten. Number 10. It's hard to imagine the sound of music as anything other than a sweeping fairy tale, but for a time, it was almost something far darker. Before Robert Wise took the helm, the project belonged to William Wyler, the Oscar-winning titan behind Ben-Hur. Wyler was a refugee from Nazi Germany, and his vision of the story was shaped by memory, not melody. He wanted more swastikas, more rallies, more of Austria cheering the Anschluss. His Maria and Von Trapps wouldn't have danced in sunlit gazebos. They would have marched through a shadow of war. Wyler began scouting locations in Salzburg, envisioning crowds saluting Hitler and streets lined with banners. His version would have leaned into political reckoning, a reminder of how quickly innocence can be devoured by tyranny. But when Wyler left to direct The Collector, Fox handed the film to Robert Wise. Wise stripped away the heaviness. He leaned into music, romance, and fairy tale charm. Where Wyler wanted rage, Wise delivered rapture, and that choice changed everything. Instead of a grim history lesson, audiences got a family musical that soared across generations. One director would have left scars, the other left songs. Number 11. Audiences swooned over Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer's gazebo dance, but the real Maria Von Trapp bristled at Hollywood's version. She insisted she hadn't fallen in love with Georg first. Her heart belonged to the children. The romance, she said, came much later, after she had already married him. "I really and truly was not in love," she admitted. "I loved the children. So, in a way, I really married the children." She also laughed at the idea of twirling in a moonlit gazebo, saying it never happened. Still, she praised Andrews' warmth and charm, proud that the actress carried her story. The truth was stranger, more complicated, but Maria knew the fairy tale would live on, even if it wasn't hers. Number 12. Hollywood gave us 7 children, a stern father and a governess who found love in a whirlwind of song. But the real Von Trapp story was far less like a bedtime tale. Georg wasn't a cold disciplinarian. He was gentle, deeply affectionate, and already adored by his children. Maria didn't arrive to raise them all, only to tutor one child recovering from illness. And their wedding? It wasn't a romantic rebellion against the Nazis. It happened 11 years before the Anschluss. Most shocking of all, Maria confessed she hadn't loved Georg when she married him. Her devotion was to the children, and the love for their father came only later. The truth was messy, imperfect, and human, but maybe that's why the fairy tale endures. Number 13. The Sound of Music wasn't just another Rodgers and Hammerstein triumph, it was their farewell. By the late 1950s, Oscar Hammerstein was dying of stomach cancer, and every lyric he wrote carried the weight of goodbye. His last gift was Edelweiss, a song so simple and pure that audiences assumed it was a real Austrian folk tune. In truth, it was Hammerstein's final lullaby, written while he knew his time was short. He passed in 1960, just months after the show's Broadway debut. For Richard Rodgers, it was the loss of a lifelong partner. For audiences, it was a song that felt timeless, echoing across mountains and decades. On screen, it became Captain Von Trapp's farewell to his homeland. Off screen, it was Hammerstein's farewell to the world. Number 14. In 1955, 1965, Maria von Trapp sold the rights to her memoir for a flat $9,000. No royalties, no profit sharing, no claim to what would come next. That single contract didn't just cover two modest German films, it opened the door to Broadway and eventually Hollywood's most successful musical. While The Sound of Music went on to gross hundreds of millions and rescue 20th Century Fox from financial collapse, the Von Trapps saw almost none of it. The family that inspired the story became spectators to their own fortune. Maria later admitted she signed too quickly, eager just to see their story told. In the end, the movie saved a studio, but the real Von Trapps walked away with little more than memories. Their legacy traded for the price of a used car. Number 15. By 1963, 20th Century Fox was teetering on collapse. The studio had poured its fortune into Cleopatra, a spectacle so bloated it nearly bankrupted them. Cost overruns, endless delays, and scandalous headlines about Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton turned the movie into Hollywood's most expensive disaster. Sound stages sat half-built. Executives whispered about selling off the backlot. Fox was bleeding, and one more flop could have ended it all. Then came a script about a governess, 7 children, and the power of song. Even Fox didn't expect much. Musicals were fading, and some critics already dismissed Rodgers and Hammerstein as old-fashioned. But when The Sound of Music hit theaters in 1965, it didn't just succeed, it became a phenomenon. Families lined up around blocks. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. By year's end, it had dethroned Gone with the Wind as the highest-grossing film of all time. The movie swept 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and became a cultural event across continents. Adjusted for inflation, it still ranks among the top films in box office history. More importantly, it pulled Fox back from the brink. What Cleopatra nearly destroyed, The Sound of Music rebuilt. A studio on the verge of silence found its voice again, carried not by swords or scandal, but by the sound of a song. Number 16. The Lonely Goat Herd may look like pure whimsy, Maria and the Von Trapp children giggling through a puppet show, but behind the curtain it was one of the toughest sequences to film. The marionettes were handcrafted by legendary puppeteers Bill and Cora Baird, each designed to yodel, dance, or leap in time with the music. It took 3 full weeks of rehearsal for Julie Andrews and the young cast to master the strings, learning how to make wooden goats prance and tiny yodelers spin in perfect rhythm. Choreographers Mark Bro and Dee Dee Wood even staged a complete dance routine just for the puppets. On screen, it's a moment of effortless play. Off screen, it was precision, sweat, and strings that nearly stole the film. Number 17. Years after The Sound of Music became a global phenomenon, Julie Andrews finally met her real-life counterpart. On The Julie Andrews Hour, the stage lit up with 2 Marias face-to-face, Hollywood's governess and Austria's true matriarch. The real Maria von Trapp praised Andrews warmly, but couldn't resist one playful jab, her yodeling. Without missing a beat, she showed Andrews how it was really done, leading them into an impromptu duet. The audience watched in awe as fact and fiction blurred, the nun and the actress harmonizing like old friends. In that moment, the fairy tale folded back on itself, proof that the Hills were still alive, not just on film, but in life itself. Number 18. The music didn't stay trapped on screen. When the Sound of Music soundtrack hit stores in 1965, it soared to the top of the charts and never really left. It went platinum, selling millions of copies worldwide, and for decades remained one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time. Do Re Mi became a playground chant, while My Favorite Things slipped beyond the film entirely, showing up in commercials, Christmas playlists, and even rap songs. Generations learned those melodies long before they ever saw Julie Andrews twirl on a mountain. The movie was a hit, but the songs became eternal. Even today, a few bars can summon not just nostalgia, but entire scenes. The Hills weren't the only things alive with music. So were living rooms everywhere. Number 19. You'd think Austria would have embraced The Sound of Music instantly. It was their mountains, their history, their story. But when the film first arrived, the reception was chilly. Local critics called it saccharine, too glossy, too sentimental. Some theaters even refused to screen it, uneasy with a Hollywood fairy tale that softened the shadow of Nazi rule. For Austrians, those wounds were still raw, and the Von Trapp's tale felt less like truth and more like an outsider's fantasy. But the world couldn't get enough. Tourists poured into Salzburg, hunting for the gazebo, the abbey, the hills alive with music. Slowly, Austria relented. What began as dismissal turned into reluctant pride. A country swept up by the very songs it once resisted. Number 20. At first, the studio wanted authenticity. The 7 Von Trapp kids were almost played by real Austrian children, plucked straight from local casting calls. But when producers listened to the auditions, alarm bells rang. The accents were thick, the delivery hard for American audiences to follow, and dubbing entire roles would bury the charm. So the plan was scrapped. Instead, young actors from Hollywood and England were brought in, some with voices strong enough for the songs, others later dubbed by professionals. On screen, they looked like a perfect family. full of harmony and spirit. Off-screen, it was a patchwork solution born of necessity. What could have been a stumbling block turned into a triumph, because once the cameras rolled, no one doubted those kids belonged in that house, or in that story. Bonus fact: for parents in the 60s, The Sound of Music was a runaway hit. For their children, it became something deeper, a ritual. Families wore out VHS tapes, singing along in living rooms as if they were the Salzburg Hills. School productions restaged the story year after year, with new generations stepping into the shoes of Maria or Liesel. Even decades later, kids who had never seen the Alps knew Do Re Mi by heart. The film stopped being just a movie and became a cultural inheritance, handed down like a lullaby. Few films live this way, crossing time and generations with such ease. The Sound of Music didn't just echo in theaters. It planted itself in childhoods everywhere and grew with every voice that sang along. The Sound of Music wasn't supposed to be a miracle. It was battered by weather, mocked by its own star, and nearly sunk by studio doubts. And yet, it soared. It saved a studio, won Oscars, and etched itself into history as one of the most beloved films ever made. Because beyond the storms, the accidents, and the bitter jokes, it gave audiences something eternal. A story of music, love, and courage sung against the darkness of history. If this film still lives in your heart, drop a comment. Tell us what timeless classic we should bring to life next. Because decades later, The Hills are still alive, not just on screen, but in the memories of every family that has ever pressed play and joined Maria's song.